Sure. In fact, this is the focus of my own presentation in the conference, and it's a part of a project that I'm doing, that I'm working on, that's led by Dan Dresna and Henry Farrell and Abe Newman on the weaponization of interdependence. And I'm looking at what can you do if you are small, if you're weak, if you're a part of the global South with not that much agency, if you don't sit on one of the economic hubs that allow for the weaponization of interdependence. And I will argue in my presentation that there are several strategies that are available, which range, on the one hand, to simply making the most of the trade war, for example. And so countries like Vietnam and Bangladesh have made some gains from the trade war that has been launched between the US and China. That's one example of what a small power can do. It can sit on a little bit on the sidelines and still make some gains because the elephants are fighting, and these smaller powers are not getting trampled on. But that's still a relatively passive strategy. When it becomes really interesting is what agency can they exercise? And that's where coalition building becomes very interesting and very important. So smaller powers can form coalitions amongst themselves, but also potentially parties that have the power to become hubs but are still not. So for example, one could see alliances forming between the European Union, India, Japan, and or coalitions, perhaps not alliances, but coalitions forming between these powers as they try and come up with alternatives to the Belt and Road Initiative, for example. And another thing that smaller powers can use is they can try and change the narrative. They can do this by getting engaged in international organizations and by making international organizations aware of the importance of addressing the question of how interdependence can be weaponized, about how trade liberalization and the gains of trade liberalization may in fact be used by systemic rivals to gain a security edge. And here small players, small powers can make a big difference because there are still international institutions in which they can work.